Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hamley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charnley. This is another historic English country church. This is in Leicestershire, and this is the church of Old Dalby. St John the Baptist, Old Dalby. This church is not actually very old. It was built in 1835, replacing a medieval building on the same site. Nothing of the medieval building survives in the fabric, although memorials and some other bits and pieces have been salvaged and retained, and we'll see them a bit later. The church that was built in 1835 is very much of the period. You can see here it's a very simple building. It's in a sort of perpendicular-ish style, because 1835 they're still not going, oh, we have to imitate the Middle Ages, but we have to build something that's Gothic, but we can do it our own kind of way. In 1894, there is a restoration when the present pulpit is put in, and the arrangements are moved a bit more from a preaching-centred service to having space for a choir and that sort of thing. And there's a Victorian tastes, like the stone pulpit. There's a new font installed that's a more medieval style font rather than the previous, what they call a bird bath style. And we'll see these things as we go around, but that's a little bit just of the introduction of the history of the structure here. So let's have a look around. There may be a slight buzzing in the background. That is a noise that's going on in the church, so I can't do anything much about it. It's to do with one of the systems. I suspect to do with the clock somewhat. Obviously, we can't have them turn it off for us. But there we go. As usual, then, we begin at the west end. We're in the tower here, looking east. Now, a slight correction to what I said earlier. There is some older fabric here, and that older fabric is behind, it's in the chancel. It's in what's known as the Lady Chapel, and we'll see that as we go around. Here we have the war memorials. Just step back a bit and make sure I don't trip over anything. But here we have the war memorial, and this is 1914-18, and you can see that the vast majority of all the people who died here, there are, well, with one exception, are either ordinary soldiers or they are NCOs. But there's one, Captain Greville Hubert Robbins Blount of the Royal Artillery, aged 31, and that's fairly common. That's what you'd expect. And then we have the Roll of Honour, and that's all the men who served, and the memorial, of course, is the men who died. Now here is the original 1835 font. You can see it's currently in separate pieces, but they are numbered and it could be reassembled. It's fairly small because, of course, the practice by then in the Church of England was that the baby would be held over the font and have water sprinkled or poured on its head, whereas this is, in fact, a Victorian font, but it's medieval style, and, of course, the medieval practice was to dip the baby in the font, so the fonts had to be bigger. So we proceed slowly in an easterly direction. Just slight diversion here, as we have over here. Here is, so you can see that. That is the church before it was rebuilt. Old Dalby, or Dalby on the Wolds, it's also known. It was in a bit of a poor state, and of course it's often cheaper to knock down and rebuild than to just repair what exists. And what they got, of course, was a very straightforward church of the 1830s, sort of thing you find 1830s, 1840s, into the 1850s. This what's known as the Commissioner's Gothic style. It's a style that was favoured by the church commissioners. There is an aisle, a bit of extra accommodation. You can see there's no pews in it now, and it's sort of an area for refreshments and things after the service, which is again, usually quite helpful. the churchmanship here seems to have been of an evangelical kind. You can tell by some of the memorials out here, but you can see here this stone pulpit and this low stone screen. That's all from the 1894 restoration. There is only one stained glass window, and as with so many, it's a memorial. It's quite late. So this is, let's go over here and try and pause with the, so here we have, this is the ladies at the tomb. He is not here, he is risen, and it's in memory of Charles James Philip of Old Dalby Hall, which is just behind the church, and he died in October the 14th, 1930. And yes, the style is very much what you'd expect in the 1930s. Here's the stone pulpit, which is very, very 1890s. And here we have the chancel. Now, it's unusually long, in fact, for the period, because in the 1830s, they didn't have choirs in the chancel. This, in fact, is why the choir stalls are actually mostly outside of the chancel. There's just a little bit of the choir stalls poked into the chancel. It's because in the 1830s, you didn't really have a choir, and if you did, they'd be in a gallery at the back rather than at the front here. But fashions change, and so you want a choir of some kind. You've got the organ in there, nice big organ. But you'll see here that, in fact, the chancel ends halfway down the actual structural chancel. Why is this? Well, the answer is that behind it is the Lady Chapel. So here we have the chancel, again very Victorian, set up with an altar here, all this from the 1890s. There would have been a table and fewer steps. But what that means is that we've got the Lady Chapel behind. And this is where, first of all, the Lady Chapel is what remains of the chancel of the medieval church. And what it's been used for is the storage, well, storage is the wrong way to put it, the placement of memorials from the old church. And you can see here, we've got this beautiful one dated 1562 rather. Obviously they've been disassembled and they've been put back together here. Now, here we have a full-size memorial. You can see this gentleman, quite grave gentleman with his beard and his skull cap, and his two wives, of course, one at a time, but nevertheless his two wives. And there's his daughters on the bottom there. Over here, this is not actually, although we've got these three small figures, this is not a child's memorial, rather it is a miniature memorial. You can see as we get here that the gentleman here, we've got these two gentlemen, and they've both got beards. And the lady in the middle is clearly an adult. So why is it so tiny? Well, usually this was a memorial to somebody who'd been buried, or to people who'd been buried somewhere else. But it's in the family church, and that's why it's here. Here we have memorial to the Reverend William George Sawyer, last surviving son of Admiral Sir Henry Sawyer, and the Reverend William George Sawyer died in 1871, aged 69, and he was the incumbent for 40 years. So he's the man who rebuilt the church, and we can see, in fact, it says here that he was a minister of the gospel of the grace of God and a landlord. So he possessed most of the estate, he owned most of the estate, and he was the vicar. And so, of course, he has got plenty of money to rebuild the church. So he did this at his sole expense. So he paid for the whole thing, which is very good of him. We may disagree with his style choices, but he did it. And so we have, again, these various memorials. These many of them are to members of the Noel. I'm saying these big ones, the Noel family. So, and I suspect that they are related to, well, they're the Noels. Yeah, they're related to the wider Noel family of Exton, but also of Hillcote, Staffordshire. And so this is this a remarkable tomb on the. This is on the north wall here. Sorry, it's just on the south wall. This is Sir Andrew Noel, favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. So he was popular with Queen Elizabeth I. Died double check it. I think it says 1603 there. He died at Brook in Rutland, so yes, it is the same as the Exton family. The one over here is, and you can see this beautiful alabaster work anyway. So these are these are not. We're not quite sure who these are. It's described as problematic by the guide, which you can imagine. Thomas Hopton, his wife Claire, and Sir Thomas Tyrrell. And yes, it's to do with family members buried elsewhere. So let's come up again. I don't spend too much time in Lady Chapel. I mean, after all, among the things I would like people to come and visit here themselves, so got to be careful. There are steps down, of course, because the altar's been raised by the Victorians. You just got to get around the back of it. But there we are, looking west. There would have been a gallery in the tower, because there's a door in the tower that indicates there was, and probably a bit of a western gallery as well. But that's been taken out probably by the Victorians. This is quite an interesting thing. This is an oil lamp with a reflector behind, obviously not used, but it would have been used by the organist to basically see the music for evening services. So that's really the inside here. Let's go around the outside and see what we can see. There we go. It just happened that as I was about to start recording, the clock began to chime 9, so I thought, well, let's hear the bell. So here we are outside at Old Dalby, or as it is also known, Dalby on the Wells, though Old Dalby is the normal name today. And you can see very much this 1830s exterior tower, which of course the original church on the site didn't have a tower, and this sort of kind of perpendicular. They're not interested in being terribly archaeologically correct. They're just interested in doing something that looks mostly medieval. So here we are. You can see obviously the clock, and very typical building, tower, nave, chancel. So let's have a look around the outside now. You can see here that the entrance is on the north side. The south side faces towards Old Dalby Hall. The north side, as you can see, there's a slope down here to the village. So that's why. The chancel, you can see the short bit, and then there's Lady Chapel on the end. And the reason why it's a bit difficult to tell that the Lady Chapel is in fact the chancel of the old church is it's been refaced, at least on this side. Reverend Sawyer wanted the building to look nice and impressive, but also there's protecting the old stonework. And it was a very good idea of his just to collect all the bits and pieces together, the memorials, and put them on, well, in the Lady Chapel at the end here. So we'll just carry on around the east end. Stand of conifers here. As we saw on the inside, there's no stained glass in the east window, and you can see that the south side, although this is historically where the churchyard would have been, it's not a huge amount of space because you've got the garden of the big house. And there's the door, because of course the chap who built it was the vicar, and he was the landlord, the squire, and therefore he got his gate here from his house, and there's his door into his vestry, and there's the little door into the Lady Chapel. So if you want to go in there, you've got the key. Some outbuildings there of the big house. Stonework is very typical of the period, these large blocks, and there's a corner here of the estate buildings, the big house. The big house has medieval origins. It's obviously it's still in private hands today. Bit of graveyard, boiler house, and looking up there to the tower. So we'll just progress here to the corner of the graveyard, making sure to try to turn the camera. So there we have the aisle on the south side, and you can see here these two windows. That's often a sign there was a gallery. Why would you have two windows unless there's a gallery that interrupts what would otherwise be one big long window? But that was removed in the 1894 restoration, when the church was reviewed and it's largely conformed to Victorian tastes. Because it is something of an estate village, and obviously it's a church built by the squire. So that is St John the Baptist's Old Dalby, or Dalby on the Wolds. So there you have it, Dalby, Old Dalby, Dalby on the Wolds. Good example of a building from the 1830s that structurally is pretty much intact, although the interior has been very heavily reworked. And you can see in that the changes in liturgical practice in the Victorian era. So I hope you enjoyed this, and may God bless you and keep you until next time.